Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and we welcome you to our Heritage Foundation Lehrman Auditorium, and would ask as we prepare to begin if you will check that cell phones have been turned off, especially for those recording our events. Our internet viewers on all of these occasions are welcome to send questions or comments, simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org, and we will post the program within 24 hours on our website for everyone's future reference. Hosting our discussion today, sitting here next to me, is Luke Coffey, who is our Margaret Thatcher Fellow in the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. But before he begins, we have some welcoming remarks from the Heritage Foundation President, Senator Jim DeMint. Senator?
You caught me in a part of the building without my coat on, but I just thought I would rush over to welcome you. And I want to thank the panel, all of you who are here to discuss all the topics related to veterans. We can learn a lot, and that is a focus here at Heritage, is not only to honor folks who've served, but to learn from that to make sure that all those who serve our country are honored in the future. But thank you for being a part of this today. I want to welcome all of you who are watching this from around the country, and I look forward to hearing this thing. I think I have to play it back instead of watching it right now, but thanks for being here, and we look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Senator DeMint, for those words. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today here at the Heritage Foundation. It is a pleasure, it's a particular pleasure for myself to host this event during the Heritage Foundation's Protect America Month. The men and women who volunteer to serve our nation are the backbone of what has made this nation great and what will continue to make this nation great far into the future. So the title of this panel, Serving Those Who Serve, is particularly important. Our armed forces have seen a lot of combat in recent years. Often the sacrifices made by our service personnel have been great. Nevertheless, our armed forces have always been there. They've never let us down, and they've always answered the call when we needed them. The enormous strain and sacrifice has been felt beyond those who actually wear a uniform. Behind every service member, there is a family. There's a wife, there's a husband, there are children, there are parents who have anxieties, needs, fears when their loved ones deploy overseas on operations. So when we think about ways to serve those who serve, we should also keep them in mind as well. As of yesterday, 6,560 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines have made the ultimate sacrifice in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. In previous conflicts, it is likely that this number would have been far higher. But thanks to advancements in personal protection equipment, battlefield medicine, many of the injuries that were once fatal on the battlefield are now survivable. Consequently, thousands of service personnel are returning back to life with physical injuries that they otherwise wouldn't have survived in the past. And this is presenting DoD, Department of Veterans Affairs, charities, local communities, local governments, and families with particular challenges. And it's not only what we can see that should concern us, it's what we don't see. It is estimated that over 300,000 of those who have served have symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome, but the true number actually remains to be unseen. It is likely that we have a mental health time bomb on our hands with our veteran community. And just to give one example here, a UK veterans charity called Combat Stress, which does outstanding work in the UK helping their veterans, issued a report that said that veterans take on average 14 years from the point of leaving service to when they self-refer to one of these centers to get treatment. 14 years. So we really haven't seen the true impact of this potential problem yet. So how, as a nation, do we address some of these challenges that I just outlined? How have the DoD and the Department of Veterans Affairs done things correctly, and how can they improve in the future? What role does civil society outside government play to look after our veterans and their families? To help answer some of these questions, we are joined today by a very distinguished panel. The first to speak will be the Honorable B. Robert Oken. Mr. Oken is the chairman and CEO of Thanks USA, a nonprofit charitable organization whose goal is to mobilize Americans of all ages to thank men and women of our armed forces. Thanks USA is doing this by providing need-based college, technical, and vocational school scholarships to the children and spouses of military personnel. Prior to joining Thanks USA, Mr. Oken's career included distinguished service in both the private and public sector. We will take questions and answers after all of our panelists speak. That being said, thank you for joining us today, Mr. Oken. Could you please get us started?
Sure. Well, thank you all for having me. I think it's really appropriate that we're having this discussion in May, which is Military Appreciation Month. And perhaps where I could best help this discussion is talking about how the role of civil society helping both our veterans and their families as they reintegrate back into society. And I can do that not because I came from a military family. I was probably just a little too young for the Vietnam draft, but and my dad served in World War II and he's still alive, but that's really the extent of my connection to the military. But we really, our family really got involved with particularly helping military families through my children. And so I can just briefly tell you the story of how that occurred, and that's how we created the charity, and that's how over the past 8 years we've been involved helping military families with their education and their scholarship. So if you, I'll tell you the quick saga, and I've done this before, so I hope I get right to the point. So the girls were 8 and 10. We have 2 daughters. Both my wife and I were working, and they'd done a lot through church and brownies in terms of sending care packages and postcards and gifts overseas. But they felt like it really wasn't enough, and this was back in '05, in the fall of '05. You might recall the conflict was not going particularly well. And so we had a neighbor that moved in. He was a lieutenant colonel, Army, severely injured in Baghdad in '03. He had an 8-year-old, and he, after 20-plus surgeries, mostly down in Fort Sam Houston, in San Antonio, he was convalescing right across the street from us. And so each day we'd walk to the elementary school, which, so in golf terms, was about a 9-iron away, sort of his 8-year-old and my 8-year-old and 10-year-old. And the girls just were really impacted by it. He couldn't pick her up, and yet he had, the greatest presence. And so the girls came to the parents and said, we have a great idea, and, as everyone knows, you listen to some of their great ideas, but not all of their great ideas, and this was one that was really great. So the idea was to come up with a scholarship program to help the families of the troops. And as we learned later, that's an important readiness and retention issue for the actual man or woman that's in uniform, is to make sure that everything's comfortable on the home front. And what they stumbled upon, that as only maybe an 8 and 10-year-old could, was that, number one, the GI Bill had not been updated and wouldn't be updated for a number of years to come. And number two, that it was very important to support the family structure back home, because that's almost the number one issue, I think, for the troop in the field, as we later learned. And so we did a little research. I had served in the Bush 1 administration in the Department of Education. We did some checking, and it turns out, other than the Marine Corps, most of the services didn't do much at all for the family members in terms of scholarships and helping them with either voc ed or 2-year or 4-year or even certification programs for their higher education. So you flash forward, after 7 full years, we've given away 2,800 scholarships, $8.5 million of scholarships. We have scholars in all 50 states, all branches of service, Guard and Reserve, including the families of those killed and wounded in action. And so that's been our experience in really working with the spouses and the dependents. We drove cross country after the first couple of years and tried to meet with as many of the scholars as possible. And I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal, I guess it was in '07, which I think has some salience for this discussion, because it was really talking about the need for corporate America to reach out and help the troops when they came back home. And I think there's a lot been done since then. I would commend the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and others for having job fairs around the country, and my former company, NBC, had done a lot through their affiliates around the country to promote that. And so I think the country is really welcoming back its veterans, but they also obviously need to make sure that the family members are part of that formula. And there are a number of issues obviously affecting the veterans, but there's a new study out that's coming out tomorrow from Blue Star Families, and they provided me with a embargoed copy, so I won't let the cat out of the bag, but it's a great survey about how the current conflict has affected the families. So I commend that to everyone. I think they're releasing it tomorrow. But the only item I would cite is they said 68% of spouses reported that being a military spouse had a negative impact on their ability to pursue a career, which is perhaps not surprising. But I guess the message I would give for this discussion is that it's very important to take care of the veteran, you know, the men or women that have served, but it's also very important to take care of their family members, because it's all one and the same. And I would say 8 years ago, I wouldn't have known that. And you know, we're a much different family now than we were 8 years ago. So now we're even though we didn't serve, we feel like we're really a part of the fabric that's welcoming back the troops and their families. So we're better for it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Oken. And I understand that you need to head off, so whenever the time comes, thank you very much for.
Thank you. My day job takes me back to Capitol Hill, so if a congressman calls, you have to answer that call. But sure, I still have a little bit of time.
Great. Thank you again. Our next speaker, we are honored to have Mr. Devin Holmes. Mr. Holmes is the chairman and chief executive officer of Warrior Gateway. Warrior Gateway, launched in 2010, is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to connect the military veterans and their family members to government and nonprofit programs in their local communities that assist service personnel in transitioning back to civilian life. Mr. Holmes' development of the Warrior Gateway portal earned him a 2011 Federal 100 Award and a 2012 Computer World Honors Laureate Award. He has over 17 years of technology experience. Thank you for agreeing to speak here today, Mr. Holmes.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Heritage Foundation for having me. You know, we started, we're coming up at the end of our 4th year, and we started 4 years ago to answer a simple question. When you think of life through the eyes of a veteran, through a military spouse, a service member returning from deployment, and they come back and they ask that question of, where do I go for help? Where do I turn in my local community for the help that I need, whether it's employment, whether it's I'm seeking training or education, whether I need help from the VA or other government programs, or just from the nonprofit community. And what we found was that people were returning home, they were transitioning out of the military, they were coming back to communities that they had been gone from for several years, and they just really didn't know where to turn. They were overwhelmed by the amount of support that was out there, and in some cases, a complex navigation system to get into services. And we hear a lot about the intake process at the VA being very complex, being very time-consuming. And so we started this effort to try and understand at a national level what was the Sea of Goodwill, a term coined by Admiral Mullen when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs a little over 4 years ago, and how do we connect people to that Sea of Goodwill. To date, we've identified about 200,000 nonprofits across the country out of the 1.6 million nonprofits that are registered with the IRS that provide support that is either directly for veterans and military families or relevant to veterans and military families. We can't ignore traditional nonprofits that have been out there for years, the American Red Crosses, the Easter Seals, United Ways of the world, Salvation Armies, that provide support that is relevant. We've seen a disturbing trend in the last year of requests for financial assistance. In 2010-11, we saw a disturbing trend in requests for food assistance. And when we think about employment, and we think about the individual who has transitioned out and that wants to get a job, that wants to go back to school or get some training, if you're worried about putting food on your table and paying your rent, chances are you're not worried about your resume. Chances are you're not worried about going to school. Where in the spectrum of needs do these individuals reside, and how do we connect them? Because we all have a multitude of needs in our life. We don't have just one. It's not just about the job. It's not just about childcare. It's not just about training. It's about the spectrum of needs of our life and how do we connect people to that. And so we've been working in partnership. We're a small organization. We're only 4 people, but we work in partnership because we believe that collaboration in the nonprofit community is the path forward. This morning I spent half the day at 800 Vermont Street with a lot of other nonprofits and Secretary Shinseki talking about collaboration and partnership. There is no single entity in this country, whether it's the VA, whether it's an employer, whether it's a nonprofit, that is big enough to tackle this on their own. We have to do this together. So how do we work better together? How do we get nonprofits working better? How do we create better public-private partnerships? And then how do we engage the employment community and help them identify, recruit, retain veterans and military spouses into the workforce? One of the things that I talk a lot about when I talk about employment is that it's great. These great initiatives, the 100,000 jobs, the Veterans on Wall Street, all these great initiatives out there are very much targeted at the veteran, at the military spouse. But we're ignoring the fact that there's another side of the equation, and that is the employer. What are we doing to train and ready our employers to understand the skills that veterans bring to the table, to understand how to retain them and how to train them for their workforce, because there is a different language that is spoken in the military versus the civilian workforce in many cases. So we have to think about both sides of those equations. So we focus on aggregating the information, understanding the supply side of support, and then how do we connect communities at the local level? So our tagline is national support, local impact. How do we connect the local community so everybody knows who everyone is? We can create referral networks. We can create networks where if you come to an organization for homeless assistance, but you also have counseling needs and you also have training needs, they know who the other people are. They can refer you. They can get you into the systems. We focus, very much on that issue, on how do we bring all of these folks together.
Great. Thank you very much.
I follow them on Twitter.
You on Twitter?
Yeah, I follow you. Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we now know
Everyone follow us on Twitter, please.
Everyone on Twitter. Thank you very much for those remarks. It is interesting to hear about these developments. When I separated from active duty in 2006, there wasn't anything like this really available. And it was a surprise for myself and many of my colleagues we had all these big plans, right? And then you got out into the civilian world and they spoke a different language and it just wasn't necessarily working out. So it's good to see that there are organizations like your own helping smooth the transition process. So thank you. Our third speaker is Heritage's very own Dr. James J. Carfano. Dr. Carfano is the Vice President of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies, the E.W. Richardson Fellow, and the Director of the Catherine and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Before joining the Heritage Foundation, Dr. Carfano had a distinguished career in the U.S. Army, serving in Europe, Korea, and various posts around the United States, and retiring as a lieutenant colonel. He continues to serve as president of a nonprofit organization, Esprit de Corps, which educates the public about Veterans Affairs. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief. So at my day job as a Heritage, we focus on hardcore defense issues, which is the constitutional responsibility to provide for the common defense. And I can tell you when the Founding Fathers wrote that, they literally were talking about money to provide for the common defense. And when they talked about what was due to soldiers and veterans, when they did meet those obligations, it was really about due diligence, providing fair compensation for services rendered. They thought in the sense that veterans, like in the tradition of all people who fought to defend their society, that the responsibility for welcoming them back into society and serving the society was largely the responsibility of the community as a whole, not necessarily specifically the responsibility for government. And so the issues there, I think, what we as a nation are doing engaging with our veterans are far more important than when we talk about the government role. So there's a group called the Philanthropy Roundtable that some of you may have heard of. They're an association that serves grant-giving foundations, because most grant-giving foundations actually have very small staffs, and so they have a very, very difficult time identifying gaps and best practices and just kind of sifting through and trying to figure out where do we want to put our scarce dollar to make the biggest impact. And I've helped the philanthropy table out on occasion, and one of the things they asked me to do is to help them organize a conference on Veterans Affairs a few years ago, and I was happy to do that. And something really interesting for me, or epiphany for me, came out of that. One was we had a diverse group of speakers from a diverse eras from World War II to the present, and a diverse group of caregivers and grant makers and supporters. And what was dramatic for me was as we did this over and over and again, and the same things came out again and again and again. It was almost as if everybody was reading off a script. and giving the same punchline. And that is we have on the one hand, not just a generation which has great needs, but also a generation which has almost infinite potential. That this is the greatest, they're all the greatest generations. This generation is no different. This generation can and will make America a vibrant, exciting, human, wonderful place to live. They have so much more to give in addition to what we owe them in terms of recovering from the wounds of war and their service. And then on the other hand, we have an enormous goodwill, as the chairman said. I mean, literally today there are hundreds of thousands of websites, thousands of organizations, everybody wanting to help. And there's this enormous disconnect between great needs and unlimited potential and people just saying, let me help. And one of the things, and what came out at the conference was, for me, was what good is. And everybody that talked, it always came back to three things that really, for me, are this marks an organization that's going to be successful at helping and serving and promoting veterans. And the first is contact, which is as unbelievable as it sounds, with everybody wanting to help everybody else. The single hardest thing for a very good organization to do is to find people to help. I know that sounds nutty, but it's absolutely true. To find the veteran and their family members and identify what needs they are and understand those needs and figure out how to service those needs, that is the single most important challenge. And in many cases, it's bewildering for a veteran because he has many different needs and lots of people want to help him, but I don't do that. You know, I do this. Well, I don't have that problem. Well, then I can't help you. Well, I have that, but I have this problem too. All right, so so here you are, you're coming back, you've got PTSD, TBI, one leg, and you've just divorced, and you have to be your own case manager in terms of managing all the services you need. So contact. The second one is comradeship, and it really gets to the issue that you talked about is programs that bring veterans together with other veterans or have veterans as mentors, or in some respect, those programs are inherently more successful because they understand the needs of each other. So it's not just the camaraderie and the kind of healing of veterans being together, but it's also veterans communicate for veterans. So for example, if you have an organization and you want to be veteran friendly, if you don't have veterans in that organization or somebody that can help you translate that, it's very difficult. So having a strong peer-to-peer component or a mentor-to-veteran component is very important in a successful program. And there's lots of different ways you can do that, lots of different models, but it's absolutely vital. And then the third one, which again, both of you guys really touched on, is community. It's programs that are rooted in a community are universally more successful. They're more sustainable. A lot of people don't get, for example, is that these things are draining on the caregivers, not just on the veterans. So you have people that are going again and again doing multiple tours of going out and working with veterans. They start to get PTSD. So they need support, they need counseling, and they need relief, right? So a program that is rooted in the community is more sustainable, and it makes not just for a better program, but it makes for a better community, because it actually makes the community a more cohesive, a stronger, and a more resilient place. So my takeaway from that is if you've got the 3 C's, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's looking for somebody's pets while they're deployed or helping a family with marriage counseling or helping somebody find a job, if you've got those 3 C's, you're going to be a successful organization, you're going to return value for money, and you're going to help people. And if you don't have those 3 C's, you're going to struggle. So I just want to highlight 2 things very quickly, and then I'll conclude. The first one is to the Philanthropy Roundtable's great credit. They produced this really terrific book, which has just been published, which is called Serving Those That Served, and it's a guide for basically philanthropic giving, which is a big issue. I have money, but I want the money to go to someplace where it's going to do some good. And what they do in this book in a very excellent way is they focus on the post-9/11 generation, what's unique about that generation, and how to best serve that generation, and they go through a whole series of case studies which illustrate the gaps in services that we have now. There's a great section in here which explains the difference between what the government does and what we as a community need to do, and where they kind of bridge together and where they kind of part ways. And then there's the whole series of case studies which shows these are groups that are really doing it right. So you can support these groups, or you can go find out a group that's like that, or create a group that's like that. So I highly commend this book. It's really designed primarily for the philanthropic community, but if you're just going to read one thing on how to support somebody, would be it. Beyond that, we really we really, the need is to reach out to communities so communities can do what they do well, which is identify their strengths and then help people in an effective way. So we, Steve Bucci, my classmate from West Point, and I, and a few other folks, got together and formed a very small 501c3 to help make the connection between the community and veterans. And our goal is if we can educate people in a community to understand the 3 C's and then give them just enough information on how do I get started, either finding a group to support, starting a group, or working with an existing group, how do I do that, then America will kind of take it from there. So we created a 30-minute documentary which is called Veteran Nation. And what we do is we make this film available for people to screen in their community. We give you the copy of the film for free and a screening kit to show you how to organize your screening. And then after you have your screening, we give you a simple 5-step guide and some essential information to show how you can get decided in what you want to do and how you want to help. And so what we've been doing is promoting communities across the country. And in the short time that we've been up, we've had screenings from California to Florida and Texas and everywhere, in groups from a few dozen to a few hundred. And several new groups have sprouted up. We found groups that were struggling and needed help and guidance, and we hooked them up with some useful people. We made some great friends like Deb Snyder, who's one of our stars in the film. Deb is an Army veteran who started her own organization to help homeless veterans in the metropolitan area. It's a tremendous organization, works with it's a model on, it's unbelievable what you can accomplish if you want to do something, and the way you can amplify the energy and enthusiasm and commitment that you have working with other people in the community. So we're extremely proud of her and the work that she does. So we have a website, which is servingourvets.org, and you go to the website and you can request a copy of the film, and we send that to you. And we're very proud of our film because we were just in the GI Film Festival, which is the only film festival in the world that is focuses on military films, and we were selected for a screening, so we're very excited about that. And we won an award. We won the Military Channel Award for the film that best exemplifies the mission and the principles of the Military Channel, which is a cable TV thing. So we're excited. We're now award-winning filmmakers. So we're leaving the day job and we're heading to Hollywood. So thanks.
Thanks. As a consequence, following Dr. Carfano around the building, you have to watch out for paparazzi.
Yeah. There was a whole bunch out before. Exactly. Were they looking for me?
Thank you very much. Next, I am honored to introduce Colonel Letty Bien. Ms. Bien is a frequent speaker on the topic of community and economic development, U.S. military and veterans, and women issues. As a U.S. Army and Army Reserve officer in intelligence and special operations, Colonel Bien served our country for 30 years in combined active duty and reservist service, including 2 tours in Iraq in 2004 and then again in 2009-2010. Her impressive military career is paralleled with an equally impressive civilian career, where she practiced as an attorney for a major law firm and also in her own private practice. She has served in a volunteer capacity as the Miami Community Chairperson for the Fisher House Foundation, which of course provides free and low-cost lodging to veterans and active service personnel receiving treatment at military medical facilities, and of course, by extension, help to their families. And since moving to Virginia, she has been a grassroots advocate for homeless vets and all issues of concern to female veterans. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. First of all, thank the Heritage Foundation for having me today, and I'm honored to be with you guys. I'm going to probably keep it pretty short because I think opening it to questions and being able to talk is, amongst all of us, to be more helpful. But the real difference between me and the rest of the panel is sort of the map scale. These guys are at the 1 to 2.5 million scale, and I'm about the 1 to 200 scale. And so it's the difference between outer space and in the weeds. And very engaged with a number of organizations that help veterans and veteran families, and really seeing when the rubber meets the road where those gaps are and where we fall short in things like homeless and putting roof over a veteran's head, as well as women and the MST issue and things of that nature. So since I moved about 2 years ago from Miami to Charlottesville, Virginia, which is a huge difference, especially even with regard to veterans. Miami being a large community, a big exile community that believes in the military and is very supportive. A lot of, big VA center and just an enormous amount of organizations that are constantly working with both the military and veteran community, and then moving to Charlottesville, which for all intents and purposes is rural, and you really start to see how the disconnect occurs when you get outside of an urban area. That's pretty concerning, especially because a lot of the people we can't reach out and touch who come back to their families and their communities tend to be the reserve, the guard, and then those military who get out and go back to their home of record. And so they don't go back to an environment where you've got the comradeship of which you speak of, which is absolutely critical at the end of the day. And so seeing that disparity is really mind-jarring, because you have to approach the issues very differently once you get outside the urban areas. And that's something that we're trying to tackle. I'm probably what you would now call a renegade volunteer. I am a thorn in the side of the Richmond VA. They have named me persona non grata, which is a good trick considering I'm a veteran. I got the little card. But I just don't like when people talk the talk and don't walk the walk. And that's not to say that the VA does that. I have found there's real disparity in different veteran affairs communities and organizations. There's some extremely dedicated people who really work very hard, and then there are those who don't, and I seem to have lately found those who don't, and they're not happy with me. And especially because I'm now in a rural community and finding a lot, they're telling our veterans to move to the city. Well, that's not the answer. I do think that the approach is definitely finding the vets and working and getting them around other veterans and the families. And then the programs do need to be rooted in the community. What I see, though, is a lot of organizations that are all trying to do the same thing, go after the same dollar. They're small organizations, and then you have these significant gaps in the process. I work a lot with homeless veterans in Virginia, as I mentioned, and it's all of the nuance that, okay, I can put a roof over their head, but if there's not serious outreach and follow-up, number one, they don't have a pot to boil the water in, and they don't have the money to go get it, and they don't have the bed, and you start with all of those kinds of things, particularly if someone's been a chronic homeless for a number of years, and we're seeing the numbers with our most recent veterans skyrocket in homeless, particularly families and particularly women with children. It's really a problem. And the vouchers that come out of, you could be sitting right up here talking about homeless, and I will pick your brain later. The vouchers that come out, 60% of them they don't even go to women with children, and there's all kinds of restrictions, how many children you could have it when they do give them, what their ages can be, and things of that nature. So there's a lot of, I love Warrior Gateway.
Thank you.
I have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, and of course I have like 79 recommendations.
We'll take them all. Every single one. We'll take them.
Okay, invite her not back. No.
I think that's what, but I will say something that I went online last week and I looked, and granted, I'm an old person, so my skill set on internet is probably nothing like most very young soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardsmen, coast guards, etc. But I couldn't find, you're the film guy, I could not find one app that veterans can go on to help themselves. Do you know of one?
I know of a couple, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's-
I was looking for veteran apps and things because our young veterans are so technologically competent, and they will look on that, and if there were any, I somehow missed them, but there were very few.
Yep.
Lots of games, Angry Birds and whatnot, but there's a real need to develop the apps that can pull these folks together. So I don't want to take up any more time. I think it's important that we open this for questions and talk about what can work and how we can get these things out there and start to engage a community and a state and a nation who says they want to help, who says they're supporting our veterans. Well, now it's time to ante up and no more talking and acting.
Great. Thank you very much for those powerful remarks. I think we can infer two things from what we've just heard. One is that serving those who served is a process and not an event. It's an evolving thing. We're never going to wake up one morning and realize that we've solved it and cracked the code and now everything's all great. It's a long-term process, and we need to treat it as such. Secondly, I think we can also all agree that all veterans are just very lucky to have individuals like the ones you've just heard who give up so much personal time and probably personal finances as well to just help improve the lives of others, and we should all be very grateful for that. I will ask the first question, and it actually ties into my first comment just now about it being a process and not an event. Right now there is a lot of goodwill amongst the communities, the charities, the non-for-profits. But as things start to wind down in places like Afghanistan and the memories of Iraq become more distant to those who aren't immediately affected by some of the consequences, how do we ensure that we keep interest in this issue? And that it's not something that just makes us all feel good today because it's in the news, and so we feel like we feel compelled to do something, but we make this a truly drawn-out long-term process. Oh, anyone who wants to start?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a disturbing one at the same time. You know, there's a couple of different, I think, parts to the answer. I'll caveat saying I'm not 100% sure this is a true fact, but I heard it this morning from Secretary Shinseki, so I'm just going to repeat it for you guys. And it identifies the longevity of the issue, which is that the VA is currently supplying benefits to one child of a Civil War veteran today.
I've heard that too.
Right. So I didn't get a chance to go on the webs and check that out. But anyways, it identifies that these are not 5 or 10-year issues. These are 20, 50, 100, 150-year issues when you think about the families and the children and the ongoing support. And unfortunately, I did not serve. I'm a civilian. My father served and spent most of his career in the State Department, the Foreign Service. My interaction with the military pre-Warrior Gateway was the Marine Security Guard, who protected us at the embassies and taught me how to drink as a teenager. Don't quote me there, but too late. It's on the internet now. And I think that my perception of the issue was shaped a lot by what was seen in the media. I think that the average American who is not directly connected to this issue, and that would be most, given the small size of our military today, is thinking that war is winding down, we're disengaging, that the issue is going away, and they do not recognize that the issue of veterans, issues of military families, are beyond just Iraq and Afghanistan. They're beyond a deployment and returning home. They're an issue that stays out there for decades and decades. And unfortunately, we're also seeing that sort of draw down in the philanthropic community a little bit as the next shiny object gets put out there and dollars start to flow elsewhere. We saw a shift, at least in our own donor base last year, with just dollars flowing to the political campaigns versus veterans issues. So it's a real challenge around education of the average person out there, that veterans issues are things that last for generations. And we need to think about it in that long-term planning stage as opposed to what are we just doing today.
Do you want to, before you, do you want to answer the question about apps? Because I know there were a couple out there.
So there's several, and what I was going to say is that I know that that nice little book you got there, yeah, I was looking at that going, there's been a discussion about putting that into an app for a couple of years now, especially out of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. There's a myriad from app out of an organization out of San Diego called Pause Rep, which is very much focused in on the issue of a suicidal crisis. How do I connect to somebody? The number has unfortunately gone up, and suicides are notoriously underreported, but the number that's currently reported, it averages about 23 a day. So at the end of this hour, one more veteran will have committed suicide. So Pause Rep is one. I blanked on my second example.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There's some that there are some that connect vets to vets.
Yeah.
And then there are also some that help with kind of case management kind of thing. But there aren't enough out. Yeah, I mean, your point is taken. There's not enough out there. I actually know some guys that try to get people interested in that, and they've kind of struggled. I just wanted to answer that question. That's, for me, one of the reasons why we created an organization is I really am kind of in crisis mode, because I do think that there is a window which is going to close in which people will drift on to the next thing. And unless we lock these programs into communities now, and they're there for a generation. So while I think we're still in the thing of, for a couple of years where people are going to be paying attention to these issues in a significant way, and we have an opportunity to, once you get a program rooted in a community, to be sustainable, and it'll be fine. But once that window's gone, it's very much harder to do that. And the reality, in terms of people thinking, well, the government's just going to take care of all this, is, I mean, you look at our long-term fiscal trends, we're not going to be dumping money on veterans forever. And that is going to, and the further we get away from the war, the pressure to go after those numbers will be the same as it is for everybody else. And the problem is even if we were dumping vast amounts of money, as you so rightly put out, our governmental structure for services is not structured correctly for this generation. And the likelihood that it's going to get all rejiggered and fixed so it effectively reaches this next generation, that ain't going to happen before we move on to the next set of problems. So there is a sense of crisis that we as Americans need to get on this now and figure this out if we're going to get it right for this generation. And I just want to say again, is too often we talk about healing the wounds of war, and we don't look at veterans and their families for what they are, which is maybe the single greatest natural resource this country has. And it's about, if you want this generation to deliver to its full potential, you have to invest in it. And it's about setting up to invest for a payback that you're going to be pulling back in for decades to come.
I would just like to add one other thing. I spent some time with Army recruiting, and I can say that if we don't take care of the veterans that we have now, it will affect our recruiting down the road. And clearly, when economic times are good, we struggle to bring people in, and when economic times in the civilian are bad, we tend to make our numbers. But as parents and educators and everyone else starts to see how we treat our veterans, our current young veterans, and if we're not taking care of them, the attitude towards joining the military will diminish significantly. And so to me, this is also really a long-term national security issue. As it is, something like 50% of every kid who walks into a recruiting station is turned away because they're obese. Number one issue. So of the other 50%, we've already lowered some of the standards on PT tests for coming in, and so at the end of the day, we're now going to look at a population that's saying, well, look how they treated these guys when they went in. You're just not going in. We can't afford to have you treated that way when you get out. So I think it goes to some sense and part of our national security in maintaining a volunteer army.
Absolutely. So all very good points. And I also heard that from Secretary Shinseki, and I didn't believe it. I Googled it, and it is true. And apparently,
Excellent. All right.
Apparently, there are 90-something children left from Spanish-American War veterans as well. Yeah, it's very impressive. Now, we'll open up the question and answers to the floor. I believe we should. Do we have a microphone? Yes, we do have a microphone. If you could please identify yourself before asking the question. We'll start down here.
Steve Bucci with the Heritage Foundation. Can you any of you talk about some of the hidden pockets of veterans, and I'm leading because I know you talked about one with me this morning with some of the homeless people that aren't in the count that you go to. But are there other hidden places? You might let Colonel Bien speak first, and then you guys can think of it. Because I think the problem is even bigger than what we think it is, because a lot of it is invisible.
I think there are a lot of invisible numbers that don't show up on all the statistics. When the VA talks about they speak in terms of X number of homeless veterans on any given day are in a shelter. Well, there's an awful lot that are not in a shelter. There are people who are couch surfing and people who are spending the nights in the backseat of somebody's car and people who are in tent cities or out behind the Kmart going through the trash and living out there. So I think the numbers are significantly greater than, well, maybe not, I mean, at least I would say 20% greater than what we're looking at. That's purely anecdotal. I've done no surveys or studies other than being on the ground and involving in the point in time counts that they do for homeless, and they'll go out to these camps where they know people are. They'll go all on the same day. They do it, I think, twice a year, and they start to count. We ask, are you a veteran, are you not? Aside from the fact that a lot of people will tell you they're veterans, and they're not, and when you go to get their DD-214, there's a million reasons why they can't get it. We send in for it, it doesn't exist, and then they say, well, it went in the fire. Well, it didn't go in the fire, because when they were in was not when the fire was. And so, but speaking with regard to that, I'm sure that holds true of a number of other statistics, and it all goes back to the point of finding the veteran, because lots of times these guys have so given up, and I of course mean women too, these folks have so given up in trying to advocate on their own for their own issues that you just throw in the towel and you just don't want to be helped because you get all geared up thinking you're going to get help or that you can find help, and then it just doesn't happen.
So real quickly, it's not so much a hidden group, but a misunderstood group is women veterans. I mean, and women are not just men veterans, right? The medical issues are different, the family issues are different, the employment issues are different. And we have a system which was basically designed for males, which has an exploding number of female veterans, and it has not adjusted well to that. And that's a huge problem. The second one is we look at unemployment statistics, and I do fall in the camp as the number one thing you can do for a veteran is get them a job above anything else. But you have to go inside those numbers, and when you go inside those numbers, the really chronic, troubling issue is unemployed veterans with disabilities. That the odds are, if you're an unemployed veteran with a disability, you're much more likely to be in poverty statistically, and that's a really serious population to watch. And the third one, which often doesn't get discussion, is when the veteran doesn't come home. So by some estimates, for every lost veteran, and it doesn't matter if you're killed in combat or you run over by a truck at Fort Hood, 10 people grieve for every veteran that's lost, and grieving lasts a lifetime. This thing you grieve, you get you resign, you get over, and whatever. I mean that's true to some respect, but it is a lifetime thing you have to deal with. So for example, there's a terrific organization called TAPS, which is Transition Assistance Programs for Survivors, which has, I think, cooperative agreements with at least 3 of the military services now that helps in grief counseling and does things. It's a tremendous organization. It's a national organization. It's a role model, but that kind of counseling and just family counseling in general. We had a panel on this a couple of months ago, I guess. One of the really interesting comments for me is saying, a lot of times the things you do that are good for the veteran are actually bad for the family. And conversely, the things that you do are in the best interest of the family are actually bad for the veteran. And she explained it a lot better than I did, but it gets really complicated. So, counseling services for family members is a really big issue.
And I agree. I think TAPS is a spectacular program for the group of people that it serves. Not to be confused with TAP, which is a government program. It's unfortunately the acronyms are that close. I think that the additional point I would make on the employment side is the underemployment. When I hear the talk about employment, it's about the person who doesn't have the job. and we're not talking enough about the people who have jobs but they're underemployed. They're working an hourly wage somewhere, and they could have a better job. And that's as much as the employer issue as it is the employee issue. And I think that, and we've seen this in the media last few weeks. There's been a great movie that's out. I think sexual trauma. We're just not talking enough about it. It's very uncomfortable, but we do have to talk about it. And it's both men and women. I just saw The Invisible War. It's Invisible War. It's Invisible War. 2 weeks ago. It's a great movie. It highlights the issues of what happens or what is happening in the military, and the military itself, DoD, is not doing a good enough job dealing with it, and those issues carry out when you leave, and now they become an issue that needs to be handled by the community, by the VA, and those support structures aren't necessarily there, and I think that number is also significantly underreported.
Yeah, and these are issues about sexual violence in
Yes.
the military. Yeah.
The gentleman in the blue shirt over.
Gordon Bear, Army retired. When I came home over 40 years ago, programs like yours did not exist, so thank you for what you do. If you will forgive a brief public service announcement, I'd like to tell you a little bit about a program that I'm spending time with. Team River Runner started in the Walter Reed Physical Therapy Pool in 2004, putting wounded warriors and their families into kayaks. And we have since expanded to about 40 programs around the country. We are not exactly a major employer, but we now have one wounded warrior and one spouse, which now constitutes 40% of our paid staff.
Awesome.
Had particularly good luck with orientation toward amputees, but also PTSD and TBI. I've worked with triple amputees. We're in the Walter Reed Pool twice a week. You'll see our kayaks on the walls out there. And check us out online, or if you're motivated, here the warmer 6 months of the year, we're out on the Potomac at C&O Canal.
Would you say the name again for folks? Say the name again for folks of the group.
Team River Runner. Check us out online, teamriverrunner.org. And we're out at C&O Canal, Block 6, off the Clara Barton Parkway, tonight at 6 o'clock, at least absent a thunderstorm. Thank you.
If I can just make a comment on that, and thank you for bringing that up. I think the important thing is that everybody's path to transition is different, right. And what's really important is you have to take the first step, which leads to the second step. And athletic activities, they've had huge success, whether it's Team River Runner, Team Red, White, and Blues running marathons out there. The Sierra Club has an entire outdoor initiative, both for veterans and military kids, getting them out there. The adaptive sports arena with USA, Sun Valley Adaptive. I mean, I've seen, double amputees in sit skis skiing down a mountain. I've seen blind veterans skiing. I mean, these are things that help you transition back to the normal life. You take that first step, and then you're like, oh, I got to think about school. Oh, I got to think about a job. Why? Because I'm moving forward from that perspective. So thank you for your service, and thank you for what you're doing.
What's really important about that is that's also part of this model of, it's not as big a step as people fear. Do good at what you're good at, and you can find a way to serve. So one of our favorite groups is a group out in Montana called Warrior in Quiet Waters, which is a fascinating community because they have almost zero veterans. There's almost no veterans in that community at all. And post 9/11, they decided they wanted to do something, and they said, what are we good at? And they said, we're good at fly fishing. Yep. And so they literally have set up their own network to canvass the VA hospitals, and they bring traumatically wounded kids out, and they use the therapeutic power of fly fishing. And to show, the contact thing was they literally had to find a vet who goes from hospital to hospital and tries to talk kids into this. The way they dealt with the comradeship thing is they brought kids out there, and kids said, this Bozeman thing's not so bad. So they helped they got the university to create a welcoming environment for veterans. And so now that several of these kids have moved out there, and these kids are now the advisor and the mentors for the program for the community. And it's a very sustainable program in the community. It's incredibly popular, and and Bozeman is very proud of this. Bozeman feels like they're part of the fight, and they feel like a better place than a lot of other communities because they felt like they've done something that's really inspiring. So it's Warrior in Quiet Waters. They've got a great website, and it's a really inspiring program. But exactly the kind of same spirit that motivated and generated you for things. So thank you for what you did.
Great. The gentleman in the glasses and the yellow tie, just in the back.
Yeah, hi, Sean Riley with the American Legion. Just wanted to say on the app thing, the American Legion has recently launched an app called Claims Coach, and it helps veterans kind of maneuver through the claims process, which can be quite daunting at times. In addition to that, the American Legion has what are called Department Service Officers, which are people that are trained to do this. American Legion is the only veteran service organization to do this, by the way. So on that, piggybacking on that, don't forget about your classic, your traditional veteran service organizations, the American Legion, VFW, DAV, who do everything from grassroots all the way up to lobbying on the Hill for veterans. So with a wide range of services available there as well. So
Thank you.
I just was going to add, in Miami, we use those veteran service organizations for getting the word out, and that there was many of them, and when something would be happening that we wanted to get the word out, they were really good, and their nets are vast, because even if people aren't members, their members know people, and with today's internet and whatnot, you really can do that. And so you're right, the veteran service organization is a great resource for finding vets among some others.
Great. The lady in the T-shirt, and then we'll go to the gentleman to her right. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Renee Hughes. I am a military spouse for 20-plus years now, and I am part of the 68% that Mr. Oken recommended, who has a negative impact on my own career aspirations. We've been through just about everything with deployments and medevacs and PTSD. We just returned to the States last summer, and I'm wondering where that sea of goodwill is. Where can I tap into organizations that are willing to hire a military spouse, who some think I'm overqualified, some think I'm taking off in a couple of years, and I'd just appreciate any advice that you may have.
So tell us about your T-shirt.
Oh, I plug for Honor Flight. I'm an Honor Flight volunteer bringing World War II veterans to Washington, D.C. to see their memorial, and we're also working on Korea and Vietnam veterans as well.
Right. And there's a great new film
Yes.
on which is called Honor Flight, right?
It's Honor
Yeah.
Flight, the documentary. It's
Yeah.
now available on iTunes
Right.
and cable.
Thanks.
Love what you guys do, by the way, Honor Flight. And it's a really hard question from an employment perspective, from what we've seen out there. Military spouses really do struggle because of that perception, that I'm going to hire you, you're going to be gone in a year or two. There have been initiatives, and some of the large national retail chains have started to try and really work through this. I wish I had far better resources for you. I'll have to think of a few, and I'll come talk to you afterwards. But it really is, I think it highlights the fact that the system, in terms of the country itself, didn't have all the right pieces in place to handle this. How do we even transfer for school teachers and nurses, transfer certifications across state lines, so you don't have to take the test again, so you don't have to get recertified, and that's as much for veterans as it is for spouses as well. It's a huge challenge that's been worked on for several years now, and we're not there yet, but we're getting closer. But I'll come chat with you afterwards.
Have you plugged into NMFA, National Military Family Association? Okay.
Great. The gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Larry Provost. I'm also with the American Legion. I came back from my third tour overseas. It was last year, as a matter of fact, and I really respect what you said, Doctor, about the founder's intent and so forth. But just as a recently returned vet, I will say, piggybacking a little bit on what Sean said, there are two central places that traditional veterans congregate. And what I mean is veterans who do a basic term of service and they get out, veterans who aren't retired and just in a respectful way don't have that military retirement to fall back on. They congregate or one of the central clearinghouses they have is the Department of Veterans Affairs. So there's always going to be a role for that. Secondly, they go to universities and schools and one of the great things that I saw, Liberty University actually started they started a military affairs office that is not just for to help them with their classes, but has PTS issues, employment issues, and so forth. And I've seen that model being applied to other universities around the country. So I think what you have to do as well, the organizations themselves, they need to link up with VA. They need to link up with universities in the area. They need to get memorandums of agreement and understanding and so forth. And again, it's a many-pronged problem that has many areas to attack, but I think that's a large part of it, is making that connection with VA and the colleges and universities.
Yeah, just real quickly on the university thing, because I'm glad you mentioned that point, because you talk about like hidden groups of help. So we have unprecedented numbers of veterans in universities, and they also have unprecedented dropout rates, way higher than normal, and normal is pretty bad. And I think you're absolutely right, is you have to have a good, strong, if you want veterans to be successful in the university environment, you have to have a good, strong support network for do that. And there are some pretty darn good veteran service organizations out there. So there is a really important role for universities to play, absolutely. It's a great point.
One of the things I would add, in Miami, we were looking around at the fact that finding jobs was difficult, and the transition and skill set translation to civilian work was somehow getting lost. And Florida International University, Baptist Health, and a number of the Greater Miami Chamber, Military Affairs Council, they all got together, and there's a program that they've now started where and they want to do it with a number of different types of positionings, but they started with Navy corpsmen and Special Forces medics, and they're going through they sort of are going through their PA program, the Physician's Assistance Program, on an accelerated basis, getting licensed. All of their in essence, remember the old clepping out where you got credit for classes already taken? The way it's an accelerated program, because the state still has to license them, is they're getting credit for a whole slew of the basic courses based on their work in the military. And then Baptist Health has committed to giving them a paid internship while they're going to school to get the PA, and then guaranteeing them a job afterwards. And with a lot of support from other organizations within the area. They want to do it for engineers, they want to do it for some other skill sets that are out there, and I think those are the kind of programs you really need. They're including the wives too, who've got those kinds of skill sets as well, and I think that to have that shepherded through a community is really a fantastic way of making that happen. The one issue I've seen with regard to vets and their unprecedented dropping out is we have this post 9/11 GI Bill that is really pretty good, and you can give it to your spouse or your children, and a lot of folks have gone to school in that. But there's this whole business out there of these for-profit schools, and they have tuned into the fact that there's a lot of money on the GI Bill side, and they are getting these, again, there's an education about education component here, where our young veterans are coming out, getting lured into these schools. They're there for an X number of period, they use up all their GI benefits, and they walk away with nothing. And I think that that is a real travesty for our vets, and I think something that needs to be looked at, something needs to be done. They need to be educated on the right programs. There's now the VRAP programs for those who are not eligible for the post 9/11, and the same thing happens where but in this case they have specific schools, I think, and programs that they go through on the VRAP program have to be approved. So believe me, there are always those who will take advantage of the money out there, and that's not to say there aren't some of those schools that are great. By no means am I making a blanket statement that they're all poor or they're all criminal or they're corrupt or trying to make money, but there's a percentage of those that are, and our kids are using up their entire VA post 9/11 benefit, and they come away with nothing to go out into the job market with.
Great.
Can I just make one
Yes,
quick
of course.
addition? And I agree with you completely on those two centers of congregation. There's some great examples, case studies out there. I wish we'd spend more time analyzing them. But San Diego State University, they created a center in the student union for veterans, and they actually had a VA rep in the center. So you didn't have to go to the VA, they were there. University of Arizona, not only do they have a space in the student union, they had a fraternity house from a fraternity that had been kicked off campus. They gave that house to the student veterans, so the student veterans can live together. Under the conditions, they would take care of it, they would follow the rules. It's vets being together with vets, creating a vet support network, but also in the community of the school, so they don't isolate, but they have their own internal support network, and they are also integrating into the civilian population. So
you're
great
saying
examples.
Florida State has.
Florida State University, my alma mater, has committed to they want to be the best university for veterans, and they're looking at all sorts of programs that they're doing with regard to helping veterans. And I love that idea about the house.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
That's really terrific.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I think that we all learned a great deal from our panelists with all of their experience, knowledge, and expertise, and we should all be very grateful for their goodwill to this cause. Hopefully something that they said may have made you think about a veteran who might be in need and how you can help them find help. Or maybe it's sparked something in your mind on how maybe you could help veterans. So for those of you that would like to watch this again, it'll be online, heritage.org, and within the next 24 hours. And thanks to our panelists, and thank you very much for coming today.
I'd like to say one thing. There's a lot of veterans in this room, and some of you haven't spoken, some of you haven't. I just want to personally thank you for your service. And if there's anything I can do for you or any of these panel members, I'm sure we would love to assist in any way we can. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.